Okay, let's see if you guys can hear all right. Are you okay for sound over here? You fine? Okay, what about you guys at the back? You okay for sound? That is not. And you okay for sound? And you guys in the middle fine? Great. Okay, so make a start, and first we'll have a little bit of review about what we did yesterday, and then we'll progress on. So we're on the topic of bond pricing, and then out of that we'll look at the problem of interest rate risk, which is something that you have if you hold a bond. So we started with a review, of the time value of money. And this is something hopefully you've met before in Accounting 102, or we'll meet it in Finance 201. And the basic idea is that a dollar today, in one sense, is worth more than a dollar in the future. And the question around how much more is it worth is what determines the time value of money. And so when we were thinking about it yesterday, we gave an example that at today's interest rates you can typically find in the market, you might be able to get as much as 4% for a year. That's probably a little bit high. And so what that's essentially saying is that a dollar today is equivalent to $1.04 in a year's time. And one of the things about that is that the 4% in the world in which we live in, we have this systematic inflation going on, and some of that 4% is simply to compensate you for the fact that the money is losing value over time. But that's not the primary reason for considering the time value of money. And even after we take account of inflation, there's a very real sense in which that $1.04 in a year's time will have more purchasing power than the dollar you have now. And the thing is, you have to be compensated for the fact that you've waited. And that extra compensation you get for waiting is the thing that we consider the time value of money. So the time value of money is not about just maintaining your purchasing power. It's actually it is growing your purchasing power by waiting before you actually use it or consume it, as people say. So then we went on to look at a couple of formulas. One is you can take a present value, that's a dollar today, and then you can calculate its value in the future, and that we refer to as the future value. And we use that quite a bit. But the really critical one is the one that goes the other way, which takes a future value, and then it converts it into a present value for today. And you simply take the value in dollars, you have an interest rate which is applied, and then you simply discount it back to the present, however many periods there are, and using the principles of compound interest. Now, why that's important is because pretty much all security valuation applies that principle. So basically what you do if you're going to value a security is that you forecast the cash flows that you're going to get, both the size of those cash flows and the times at which you receive them, and then you discount them back to the present with some appropriate interest rate. Now, in terms of the timing and the size of the cash flows, for something like a bond, it's pretty easy to figure that out because that's specified in the contract. Usually it's, in a bond, there's a specified coupon rate, and then there's, it's specified, I'll say, annually or quarterly or semi-annual. So you know exactly when they are, and then it's a fairly straightforward thing to calculate its present value applying a discount rate to that. The same principles apply to something like valuing a stock. It's just that when you're valuing a stock, there's more uncertainty about both the size of the cash flows, because typically you'll be getting dividends, and there's also greater uncertainty around the timing of those. But in principle, it's exactly the same. You work out, forecast what your cash flows and when you're going to get them will be, discount them back to the present, add them all up, and that will give you a price for your security in a stock, something like that. And then we looked at a few types of yield. This is where we were in the types of yield, because when you think of a bond basically being a type of loan, and package that loan up into a security, is that there's several interest rates associated. One is called the coupon rate, and that's basically the rate of interest that is being paid to you as a person who's made the loan. that's usually set at the time that the bond is issued, and for the types of bond that we're considering, it's fixed for the life of the bond. It doesn't change. Now, there are bonds that will change, but the type we're considering here are basically ones coupon is set at the time it's issued, and then it does not change. So that's simply an interest rate, but it is known as the coupon rate for historical reasons. When you actually go to trade the bond in the secondary market, or if you're not going to trade it but you want to value it for whatever reason, you'll almost always find that the interest rate that applies in the secondary market is different to the coupon rate. And that interest rate is referred to as a yield. And so this gives rise to the fact that the bond may trade at a price different to its par value. So if we have the case where the coupon rate, that's the rate that's being paid, that was set at the beginning, that's being paid to you, if that is actually less than the current rate in the market, the current yield, then the bond trades at a discount. If the coupon rate and the yield are the same, then the thing trades at basically at par value. If you get the other situation, then it trades at a premium. And so the bond's prices will move in response to the interest rates. Now, there are a wide range of different interest rates, or in terms of bonds, we tend to call them yields that you could look at, and we were starting to look at three of them. One is the yield to maturity, the other is the expected yield, and the final one was the realized yield. Now, two of those are yields that you look at today looking forward, and there's basically how much you expect to earn over the life of the bond. And the yield to maturity is typically the one that's used in the markets. So if you're going to go out into a bond market, typically what you see there is that they quote a bunch of interest rates rather than an actual dollar value for the price of the bond. And that interest rate that they're using for the pricing of the bond is the yield to maturity. But that thing does make two assumptions which we know to be pretty unrealistic. One is it assumes that you're going to hold the bond right through to maturity. And the second thing it assumes is that you're going to be able to reinvest your coupon payments at exactly the same yield to maturity that you bought the bond. Now, those two things are unlikely to be true, and so you may want to use the other one that we talked about, forward-looking one, which is the expected yield. Expected yield, you have to make forecasts about what you're going to do with your coupons. You have to forecast the interest rates that you will get for them, or if you're going to spend it, you simply take their current value. And if you're not going to hold the thing to maturity, you're going to sell it, then you have to forecast a selling price. But once you have made those forecasts, you can then calculate its current value for you. Now, the final one that we looked at is the realized yield, and that's the yield that you work out at the end. Because at the end of the life of your investment, whether you've held to maturity, whether you sell it early, you know everything about it. You know whether there's been any defaults. You know what you did with those coupons. You know what the final payout was if you sold it, or whether you got the full par at maturity. You know all that stuff, and you can calculate from that what rate of interest did you earn on the investment that you made. So that basically sums up where we're going to, where we got to yesterday. So we're going to do this example here. So we'll look at this example here, and we're going to compute this person's actual realized yield. So here's the basic problem. So you buy a bond. It costs you $1,000. The bond itself is a 10-year bond. So it actually matures in 10 years. Well, probably if you paid $1,000 for it, you probably bought it at time of issue. It has an 8% coupon rate for it, which it pays annually. But you hold the bond only for 3 years. 3 years out of those 10, and then you sell it for $902.63. And so what you are doing is you're only holding a finite amount of time, way less than maturity, and at this point you know what happens. So this is the basic problem. Let's draw a timeline here. So here's today, cash flow out $1,000. And then you know that there's going to be 3 cash flows in this particular case. There's going to be one payment of the $80 for the first coupon. The next year you got that other one. And then you know at year 3 you got $902.63 for it. Plus, you also get the $80 coupon. And so on that third one, your total value there is $982.63. So that's the basic set of cash flows. How are we going to work out how well this person did? What sort of interest rate did they actually get on the life planner investment? How are we going to work that out? Oh, very quiet. So what are you going to do with the cash flows? You got 3 of them. What are you going to do with them? Yeah. Are you going to use your financial calculator special function? Is that what you're doing? Okay. I mean, if you have a financial calculator, this is just simple. This is really easy to do. And so let's get a financial calculator and let's actually do it. So there's your bond functions. Well, my bond function and my ones. Pretty much every financial calculator has a set of them. They're here. And so how many periods do we have in? How many periods? 3? 2? 3. Yeah, there's 3 periods, so I'll put that in. What about the interest rate? Okay, the interest rate's the thing we want to calculate, so we don't know that. What about the present value? -1,000. Okay, so that's the purchase price, and we got to make it negative because that's the cash flow out. Okay, so we put that in the present value. And what about the payment? 80. Okay, so that's the coupon payment to us. Now, calculator will take care of the fact that there's 3 of those because we put it in here. And what about the future value? Yeah. So although you got a total value of $982, one of those is a payment, and so the future value, $902.63, and we'll put that in the future value there. So with these functions here, if you have 4 of them, the calculator will simply go ahead and get you the 5th one that you don't have. And so mine's a little bit of a slow thing, so let's see. Yes, running. Okay. So there's come out with the answer. Let's just round that down to 2 decimal points. And so the actual, the realized yield in this case is equal to 4.91%. Now, when you think that this thing here, this 8% here, that is your yield to maturity. That's what you bought it at. You expected to get 8% at the start of the bond. You end up with only 4.91%. So you haven't done very well there, and the reason for that is that there's this capital loss. So if you think about what's happening there, these coupons were paid as usual, but if you think about the fact that the thing has $1,000 par value, you take off the $902.63. How much is that? So $7,397. Okay, so that there is a capital loss. So you've actually taken a loss, and that's the thing that accounts for the fact that you didn't do very well on this investment. You paid $1,000, but when you actually sold it, you got $97.37 less than that $1,000, even though you got the 8% as you expected. And it's that capital loss which accounts for the fact that the realized yield is lower than what you expected. Okay, any questions on that before we look at another aspect of this? Everybody happy? Okay, we're all happy. Now, there is another thing you could have done with that if we had been given the information. Okay, at this point here, I think, if the coupons are being reinvested and their value known at the time, then you can do a simple 3-period discount calculation. Now, what that means is if we start again with a new bit of paper, is that we'll start with the same timelines here. So here's your $1,000 out. You know, sorry, I'm going to put it down here times 0. There's your $1,000 to pay for it. You have times 1, 2, and 3. And you get $80 there, $80 there, and that one there is $9.82 and 63 cents. Now, in the question, let me go back to the question, it doesn't tell us what we did with those coupons, but it could have done that. And so if we had known what we did with the coupons, what we would have had done is you would have had a coupon here of $80, and you would have some interest rate that you would have been able to reinvest it right at, we'll call that interest rate at time 1, and it would have been compounded out 2 periods, and so you'd square that because there's 2 periods, and that gives you some final value, whatever it would have been for the first coupon. When you got the second coupon, again, you could have reinvested it, so that would have been $80, 1 plus whatever the interest rate was at that time, and that would come out with some final value there for your second coupon. And then, of course, this one here, the $9.82 and 63 cents would be unchanged. And if you added all those up, you would get a total value for your investment. And because you're at the end of your investment, you would actually know all these numbers. So say we had that. How would we then calculate our realized yield if we had this number and that number? Okay, we had our total value, whatever it may be, and we knew we paid $1,000 for it. How do we calculate the realized yield in that circumstance? Yeah, go ahead.
Take $1,000 forward, or you can take the total value back.
Okay, so you know your present value, you know your future value, and you can either work out an interest rate to take the present value into the future value, or the future value into the present value. It doesn't matter which way around you do, come out the same answer. So let's take it this way. So this is how you would work it out. So you have $1,000 here at the start. This is what you knew you pay, so that's your present value. And this here is in the calculation is the future value. So you put that in the calculation, and you divide that by 1 plus some interest rate, which currently at the moment you don't know what that is, but you can work it out. And because it's over 3 periods here, that's the power 3. So to solve for I, that's the total value, whatever that may be in dollars, divided by the 1,000. Take the 1/3 root and subtract the 1 off. So if you knew this stuff, which, if in real life you would actually know that, because you would know exactly what you have done with the coupons, whether you spent them, whether you reinvested them. If you reinvested them, you know what, if you reinvested them, you know exactly what sort of interest rates you got. You could do it this way. Now, when we looked at this problem here, we didn't have this information. But if you had it, you would simply go ahead and use it. Okay, any questions on that before we chug on? Okay, everybody's happy? Good. So if you don't have a financial calculator, you can do this. It's just a lot more work. You do have to use some sort of numerical method. We don't actually cover any numerical methods in this course, but in 205 we look at 2 of them for solving this type of equation. So if you've got a calculator, piece of cake. Okay, any question on that before we move to these bond theorems? Nobody has any questions. Everybody's happy. Okay, so these bond theorems, as I said yesterday, they're genuine theorems in the mathematical sense of a theorem. They can be mathematically proved, and if you come and do 205, we'll actually prove them. But what we're going to do here is basically talk about them in some very qualitative ways, of which there are three bond theorems that we're going to look at here. So the bond theorems themselves tell us about the relationship between bond prices, and the interest rate changes. And these interest rates are the things we call the yields. So there's three of them. There's one about the bond price and the yield, one about volatility and maturity, and a third one about price volatility and its coupon rate. So those are three that we're going to be looking at. So, question there, what is the relationship between the bond price and the yield? So let me draw a picture here again. So here's our thing here. So we'll put yield along this axis here, put price up here, and this, of course, will be in dollars. So what's the relationship between the bond price and its yield? Yeah.
I'm just wondering that this yield is the yield to maturity you're talking about.
Well, if you go into a bond market, a secondary bond market, that's the basis on which the price is quoted. So if you go into the bond market and you see like a 7.1% yield, that is the yield to maturity there. That's the convention that they use to price the bonds. Okay, because remember what I said yesterday about if you look at a bond pricing, a bond trader screen, sometimes you have sort of 7 or 8 different interest rates. The yield to maturity is the one that's used to price the bond. Okay, and if you want to, if you think that you can get a better estimate of your return at the start, you use a different yield. But this is the one that's used in the market to price. Okay, so where were we? Relationship between the bond price and yield. Go ahead.
It's an inverse relationship, so when market yield increases, prices will fall, and market yield will prices will
Okay, so when the bond yield goes up, the price goes down. Conversely, look at the other way. Yield goes down, bond price goes up. Oops, oh, there it is. Oh, it is there. Okay, so that's what it looks like. I mean, it definitely is curved, and this is very clear inverse relationship between the bond price and its yield. And this particular point here, this is where the coupon rate equals the yield to maturity. Okay, so that's relatively straightforward to understand. Can be proved if you need to, and we will in 205. But that's the basic idea, is that as yield goes up, price goes down, yield goes down, price goes up. Any questions on that before we continue on? Okay. So, now, next one, what's the relationship between the bond price and volatility, bond price volatility and time to maturity? Let's ask the question, when we talk about price volatility, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, basically the up and down movements. So if we take a bond like that, and let's put another one on there. Put another one on there. We'll put, say this is, this is bond A, and that's B. Which of those has a larger price volatility, A or B? Yeah, bond B, because the price, for the same movement in the yield, you get a greater movement in the price. So that's what we mean about volatility. If the interest rate changes, the price changes, and the bigger that price change is, the more volatile the price is. So, taking the top one there, what's the relationship between price volatility and time to maturity? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So, assuming everything else is equal, basically the longer the time to maturity, the greater the bond price volatility. And the bond price volatility can affect us because, the interest rates in the market change. Basically, the longer our bond is to mature, then, if the interest rates move, the more price rate movement we're going to have. And that is one component of the interest rate risk. One component is the price risk. And this is one of the things where it comes from. So what about the other one? What about the relationship between the bond price volatility and the coupon rate? Yeah, go ahead.
While the coupon rate has a volatile price rate, because proportionally
Okay, so the basic relationship there is that you look at it two ways. One is the lower the coupon rate, the higher the bond volatility, or alternatively, the higher the coupon rate, then the lower the volatility. And simply, when you look at as to why that is that if the coupon rate is higher, you get more value closer to the present, and that affects the volatility. So let's have a little quick quiz here. See if you actually really understood this stuff. So here's pricing curve. So there's our yield along here, and here's our price up here in dollars. And there's, we'll say that's bond A, and then we'll shove another one on here. That's bond B. So we got two of these things. So there, yeah. Okay. So we've got two bonds, A and B. Let's say that everything about these two bonds is identical, with one exception. And that exception is that one has a longer time to maturity. So just looking at that, you got no numbers on that chart at all. Which of those two bonds has the longer time to maturity? Yeah, B. Basically because we know the longer the time to maturity, everything else being the same, the higher the volatility, B is the one with the higher volatility. Okay? Some people look puzzled. Do you want to ask a question on that before we go to check on? Okay. All right, so let's take the case of that these two bonds, A and B, are identical in all respects, except one of them has, what's different is their coupon rate. So which one of those two has the higher coupon rate, A or B? Yeah, A does, and because we just said, the larger the coupon rate, the lower the volatility. And so even though there's no numbers there, as long as everything else is the same, we can actually tell which is which, simply by looking at how much volatility they have. And that volatility, is going to be critical in understanding the interest rate risks that we face as bond investors. Okay, any questions on this before we move along? Okay. So, let's see. So that. So if you actually want to calculate it, this is what you do to calculate it here. So this is your price earlier, one period earlier. This is the price now. And you simply take the difference between those two, divide it by what it was, and you get a percentage change in the bond price. So if you actually want to calculate a percentage change, bond volatility, for a fixed given length of time, there's a very simple formula to actually go out and calculate what that volatility is. Now, here's a chart of just some numbers. So maybe I might put that back up there so for reference. When I've drawn those pricing curves, they're definitely bent. They're not; these aren't straight lines, and you can see that in this particular chart here. So here we have three coupon rates. So there's a 10-year bond, and we've got the coupon rates here. So this is a 0 coupon bond, a 5, and a 10. And then we got the bond price at a 5%, and then we consider what happens if it goes up to 6% in one case and down to 4% in the other. Now, as you can see, at 5% yield, the 0 coupon bond is bought at some considerable discount. At 5%, the coupon rate and the yield are the same, so it trades at par. When you get this point where it has a 5% yield, but it's paying out a 10% coupon rate, then we have this significant premium to it. Now, if you put the interest rates up, so this is a plus 1% along here to go to there, then the price drops. Okay, and there's the drops here in terms of dollars, and the drops there in terms of percent. If we go to the other way, minus 1%, you get this lot over here and you have the same thing. Now what you see is that these are not symmetrical. So if you say, just compare this one here if the yield rises, this thing loses 6.6% of its value. Whereas if the thing falls, it gains 7.25% of its value. So you can see there in the chart, well, my graph, is that if the interest rate goes this way, and you get a loss, but that loss is less than if you have an equivalent movement in the other direction. So if we had a 1% in each direction, 1% that way and 1% that way, it's not a very good drawing, but the loss here would be smaller than the gain there. And that simply comes out of the fact that they really are curved. These aren't straight lines. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? Okay, go ahead. So there's a little nice diagram compared to my ones. Okay, now we're going to come to the concept of what we call the bond duration. And this is a tool. It's interesting where this actually came from. There's if you read the book, they talk about the Macaulay's duration. Macaulay actually came up with his duration in the 1930s, and it was promptly forgotten about. And then at several points over the next approximately 40 years, a number of different people independently rediscovered Macaulay's duration, and it was promptly forgotten about again. And the reason that was forgotten about is that interest rates were strictly controlled. And so we didn't have bond price volatility, and what they used the duration for as a tool for measuring the bond price volatility, and then of course that feeds into your risk management. So they basically didn't have any risk to manage, so they didn't need it. When they started deregulating in the 1970s and bond prices became volatile, that's a consequence of the fact that the interest rates became volatile, the Macaulay duration was rediscovered and soon put to good work. So this thing here, the bond duration, is going to be one of the key concepts in managing the interest rate risk that you have as a bond investor. Okay. We're going to have two parts to the interest rate risk. We're going to have a price risk, and we're going to have a reinvestment risk. So first up, price risk. What are we talking about when we say, as a bond investor, we face price risk? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so that's simply, if the interest rates, which we call a yield, if they change, then the bond price is going to change. So sometimes that will work in our favor. If they go down, that will work in our favor. Goes up, works against us. But either way, it's considered a risk. Okay, that's one part of the interest rate risk. What are we talking about when we say, or talking about reinvestment risk? Yeah, go ahead.
Because your coupon payments can't be directly reinvested in the bonds, there's the risk that you won't be able to reinvest them at the rate equal to what the bond is paying.
Yeah. Okay, so the basic problem is that it simply pays you your coupon. There's no mechanisms for reinvesting that coupon into the bond, and so you have to go and reinvest it elsewhere. And the bond pricing assumption is that you're going to be able to do it at the yield that you bought it at. That may not be true, and that's what gives rise to our reinvestment risk. So we're going to consider how on earth these two things offset each other. So give myself another bit of paper. Okay, so let's consider this case here. So here's in this case, this thing's going to be time along here. This is where we start, and this is maturity here. So let's consider the case you simply buy the bond at the time that it's issued, and the coupon rate and the yield are exactly the same at the time of issue, so that's fine. It sells at par, you buy it. And let's say, for example, over the entire life of your bond, the yield stays exactly the same. How would we draw the change of the price, if any, over the life of the bond if the interest rate never changes? Just the price part of it. Yeah. So if the yield doesn't change on the thing, it just travels along here, and at the end you arrive at that maturity, and this was par, and so it simply trades at par right through the entire life of your bond. Now, let's consider the case, what would happen if, say, you bought the bond, and the very first thing that happened to you is that the yields went up, and then we'll assume after the yield went up, the day after you bought it, that the yield remained constant from there through to maturity. What would happen to the price of your bond in that situation? Yeah.
It would start above and it would remain above, but it would curve down to the point where at maturity it was equally parallel.
Okay, that would be the case if the yield went down. In the case the yield went up, the price would drop. Okay, yeah. So, unfortunately, if that had to happen to us, we'd take a capital loss straight away at this point. Day after, unfortunately, the yield went up. But over time, because the thing, assuming there's no defaults, it would eventually arrive in at the par, because when it matured, that's what it would pay you back. So this line here, in some sense, represents our price risk. If we got hit the day after, then we just simply lose money straight off. But if we hung on, in the end, you would get paid out par. Okay, so that's the bond price. Now let's consider the case, the value of the coupons. So again, that's dollars, and here's your maturity over here. So this is time along here. Now, to do this properly, we should make these things steps, because you get your coupons in steps. But let's just make it nice and smooth to make things easy. If we took this case here, that the interest rates didn't change, and we actually managed to reinvest our coupons at that yield, how would we draw, shift this thing up a bit. How would we draw the value of the coupons over time on this graph here? Curving upwards. You mean curving upwards? Yeah. Yeah, so although we don't have any numbers there, I mean, you start off, you've got no coupons because that's you just bought it, but eventually, you get paid, you reinvest, and so on, and ultimately, the whole thing, rises and up, and then you end up here somewhere. So, it ends up like that. Now, if we make another one down here, I got up. Oh man, I can't get on here. Okay, so I'm going to slide the thing up. So I'll slide this up. So here we're going to have another one. Total value. Okay, so there's our time again. There's our dollars. There's par. And there's our maturity there. So in the case that this thing here, you start off at par, and ultimately it rises, and it gets to some point there at the end. So add this nice straight line to that one there, you get this one here. Okay. Slide this thing up and down. Okay, so when we considered this one here, we had the interest rate rise on us. So the day after the borders, yields went up. We took a big hit on the price. What happens to the value of our coupons in the case that the yields rose? Yeah? Okay, so we get some good out of this. We can reinvest the coupons at a higher rate, and so what will happen to those things is ultimately we'll end up say up there. That's so this one here is the value with no change in the interest rates. This one here is a yield rise. So if we add, this one here, put this one in, this is a yield rise here, and that one is a no change. If we add this one and this one together in our bottom graph, we find out that it's at the start, because our coupons aren't worth anything at the start, we start down here. I might change to red. But in the end, you're still going to get par at the end of that bit of it. Coupons are worth more, so ultimately you do end up better off. There's our yield rise case. And there's our no change. Let's push it up a bit more. Okay. So if we get a yield rise, let's see where's things over here. Let's see. So yield rise, this is this case here, the bond price fall, which is bad, but the coupons are going to reinvest at a higher return, which is good. Now, ultimately, if the yields rise, you can see, even though we put no numbers on this, that ultimately you're better off. Okay, you might have to wait a long time, you might have to hang on for a long time, but ultimately it works in your favor if the yields rise. And so you can actually split the thing into two pieces. If you draw a line here, we'll just mark this here with a D. In this period here, let's push this up. This is your dominant risk, price risk. In there, and from that point on, the reinvestment risk dominates over the price risk. Yeah, this is dominates. But you can see from the way we've drawn the diagram there, kind of hairy, but we've drawn it anyway, there's a place where those two things exactly equal each other, and they offset each other. So the price risk, there's a point somewhere, there's a point, one point in time, where the price risk and the reinvestment risk exactly offset each other. Okay, any question on that before we try to consider the other one? Because the other one's much harder to draw if the interest rates go the other way. Any question on this before we try to do the other one? Go ahead.
What's that?
That is our mystery point. That's the point in the entire life of the bond where the price risk offsets the reinvestment risk. Okay? Before the D, the price risk is the main risk that you face. That's the one that dominates. At D, those two things exactly offset each other. Because remember, over here we said that we looked at the case of interest rate rise. Bond prices fall, it's bad for us. Before the D, the bond price fall, that's our price risk, is the thing that's most important to us. But on the other side, the coupons are reinvested at a higher rate, that's good. And you can see from the diagram that it's good. And once we get past the D, then the reinvestment risk is the one that dominates. That's the one that's most important to us. So before the D, the price risk is the most important. After the D, the reinvestment risk is the most important. And the D is the point where those two things exactly offset each other.
So ideally, when you find a D, ideally.
Yeah. Yeah, we will. Yeah, okay. Be patient, we'll get there. We want to find D. We want to find D because as bond investors, this point is actually critically important to us. That's what we want to find. Eventually, we'll get there. Probably not today, maybe tomorrow. No, Friday. But finding that point in time is critically important to us as bond investors. Okay, so let's consider the other case. Now, this is much tougher to draw, and I'm not a very good artist, as you probably figured out. So I don't So let's consider the case that the interest rates went down. So here's our, time. There's a maturity. There's our price up there. And we'll stick the one in here where it doesn't change there. If the yield dropped, what would happen to our, say it dropped straight away and then stayed constant? What would happen to, how can we draw the trajectory of the price between, the day after we bought it until maturity? Okay, so instead of going up, it comes down. Yeah, that's what happens to it. So if the, but it would end up at maturity, same place. So this one here along here is your no change case. And this one up here, unfortunately for us, yield rose. Well, actually this is good. Yield fell. Now, if we go to do the same thing with the coupons like we did last time, in both cases they start at 0. So there's our 0, there's maturity, and put in the no change case here. That's no change. There. Okay. Okay, in the cases that the yields fell, what would happen to the value of our coupons? It would come up slower, and so overall they would not be worth as much to us. So in this case here, it would just start at 0 and rise up here, and this is again a yield fall. So putting the two things together, and this is why it's hard to draw total value. Where are we going here? The total value here of both those things, make a nice graph, is okay. So there's the par to start with. There's a maturity. The other one would go up like it did before, and in there at some terminal value. So there's our no change case. But ultimately, if you think about it, from the top one, you're going to start off the day after when the yields shift. You're going to get a big capital gain at the start, but ultimately when you get to this point here, because the yields went down, your reinvestment value went down, you're going to end up worse off. And so something happens like this. And this is your yield fall case. And again, there's our D. Oops, hang on, push it up. And we have exactly the same thing. Price risk dominates over here, and reinvestment over here. And so, because from the top one, you start off big capital gain, but ultimately over the long term, because that arrives back at par, and your coupons are going to end up being worth less in this particular case, you eventually end up worse off if the yields fall. And initially, it's good for you. It says there. Interest rates fall, bond prices rise. This is good. Coupons are reinvested, lower return, bad. But ultimately, you end up, initially it's good for you, but if you hang on too long, you end up underwater compared to where you would have been. And again, the D is this point where those two risks, the price risk and the reinvestment risk, exactly offset themselves. And so finding that D in terms of time is critically important to us as bond investors, because that's where we get these two risks offset. Okay, any question on this before we wrap up? Yeah, go ahead.
Wouldn't D constantly be changing as interest rates change?
It does, but it's kind of surprising. It doesn't change very much. It does change as interest rates change, but it doesn't change a lot. So, okay, so one thing we should probably qualify this to say D is, to a first approximation, is where these things offset each other. And if we need to be more exact, there are other ways of becoming more exact. But to a first approximation, this is where it happens. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so wrap it up at that point, and we'll pick it up close to here tomorrow and progress on. If you have any questions, no, Friday. If you have any questions, I'll be around for a while. Otherwise, we'll see you Friday. Yeah, there's lots and lots of different interest rates. So one thing to realize is when you think about yield, I mean, it is an interest rate. And so when you're thinking about reinvesting, because like say coupon is then you're going to have to reinvest it somewhere. And although we have a lot of like we have names like coupon rate, yield, all this stuff, at the core they're all interest rates of one sort or another. And so the yield to maturity is the interest rate right at the start of your life of your investment. Now, when you get your coupon payment and you have to go and reinvest it, let's say for example you went to a bank and put your money in there, there would be an interest rate associated with your coupon. And if you got the next one and you think, oh, I'll buy another bond with some of it, I'm going to use the bond, there's going to be a yield associated with that, and that again is an interest rate. So there's literally thousands of these interest rates, and it's just a matter of identifying whichever one is appropriate to your investment.
Interest rates increase,
Yeah.
bond price drop.
Yeah, that's right.
But then you said when we reinvest that coupon, we actually get a greater payment.
Yeah, let's say for example, the bond when it was issued, say because you bought it on issue, and suddenly, it was a 6% bond, and then the day after you bought it, the interest rates went up, the yield went up to 8%, and somehow you could actually get that. What would happen is, like when you got your first coupon payment, is instead of having to go out and reinvest it at 6%, which is what you expected to do at the start, now you get 8%. And so you put your money on an investment at 8%. And so because you're now getting 8 rather than 6 over the remainder of the life of the bond, that's going to become more valuable to you. It's because you're getting another 2% interest, and if it's compounded over several periods, that's going to rise in value.
So that yield is the same interest rate we're talking about when we reinvest our coupon.
Yeah. In the actual bond pricing formula, it assumes that yield to maturity is the interest rate you will get when you do a reinvestment.
Yeah, so that's the assumption that we have.
Yeah. But in the case that that assumption is one of the things that gives rise to this problem of interest rate risk in terms of reinvestment risk. Because